Welcome back, everyone, for another deep dive. And today we're tackling a really crucial topic, safeguarding young people entering consecrated life. And for this one, we're diving deep into a webinar by Father Noel. He's a Jesuit priest, and he really brings a fascinating perspective to the conversation.
Yeah, his approach is so interesting because he acknowledges right off the bat that there are mountains of information already out there about safeguarding. You've got books and articles, papal documents even, but
Right.
but he argues that's just not enough.
I like that.
You know what we need? He says we need to hear from young people themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's exactly where we're headed today. Get ready to hear directly from those who are navigating this unique and often challenging world.
I think what makes Father Noel's approach so powerful is that he weaves in these personal stories, like real life experiences, to illustrate the complexities of this issue.
Yeah, for sure. It's not just about, rules and regulations. It's
Right.
about understanding the lived experiences of these young people.
Exactly. And that really gets to the heart of, one of the first questions we need to ask. Who are we talking about when we say young people in this context?
Right. It's not just about age, is it?
It's not just about, I mean, yeah, many people entering religious life are in their late teens or early 20s, sometimes even 30s, but it's more about their stage of formation.
Right.
They're going through periods like postulancy where they're initially discerning their vocation or the novitiate, which is a deeper immersion into religious life, and then temporary vows where they're making those, initial commitments.
Right. So much changing.
It's a lot. And these are such intense periods of transition and self-discovery. And I think that can make individuals particularly vulnerable regardless of their actual age.
So we're talking about people navigating this incredibly formative period of their lives. And at the same time, they're also stepping into this unique environment with its own set of expectations and power dynamics. It
Exactly.
seems like a recipe for vulnerability.
Yeah. And Father Noel really, doesn't shy away from that. He
Okay.
highlights both the positive and the negative aspects.
Right.
He acknowledges that many young people do find immense joy and fulfillment in their vocation. They experience spiritual growth. They form these deep bonds of community. They have support from their mentors.
However, he also, doesn't hesitate to delve into the shadows as well.
That's right.
So what are some of the challenges that young people in consecrated life might encounter that could make them more susceptible to harm?
Yeah, so he paints a bit of a sobering picture. He
Yeah.
talks about the potential pitfalls that these young people might face. Many of them grapple with feelings of isolation, especially if they've come from secular backgrounds.
Yeah, makes sense.
They may also run into generational gaps or struggle to find their place within these really established communities.
Right.
And then there's the very real and very sad issue of abuse, and it can take various forms: emotional, spiritual, even physical.
And it's so heartbreaking because, Father Noel doesn't just talk in generalities. He gives specific examples of vulnerabilities that can make young people susceptible to this abuse.
Yeah, for sure.
For instance, he talks about dependency on mentors.
Right.
These mentors hold so much authority and influence, which can unfortunately create opportunities for exploitation.
Absolutely. And he also points to low self-esteem as a factor.
Yeah, I can see that.
A lot of people entering religious life might already have some vulnerabilities or insecurities, and then the intense scrutiny and self-examination that's inherent in the formation process can sometimes exacerbate these feelings, and that makes them more susceptible to manipulation.
And then there's the element of trust or even naivete,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, for sure.
Maybe because of their idealism or a sheltered upbringing, they might not have developed that kind of discernment to recognize red flags or unhealthy power dynamics.
And that's exactly why Father Noel emphasizes that you can't just tell people to be cautious, right? You have to give them the knowledge and skills to be able to identify and address potentially harmful situations.
It's about empowering them to protect themselves.
Exactly. It's more of a proactive approach rather than just reacting to crises.
Yeah, it's about being preventative rather than reactive. And he also brings up loneliness as a factor,
Yeah.
being separated from family and friends, navigating this whole new environment and facing, the inherent challenges of discernment. It can all lead to feelings of loneliness and maybe make someone vulnerable to seeking connection in unhealthy ways.
That's right. And finally, he points to the vulnerability of insecurity about one's vocation.
Oh, wow.
Imagine being in that crucible of discernment, right? Questioning your path, and then someone in a position of authority preys on that uncertainty, using their influence to manipulate you.
Oh, wow.
It's scary stuff.
Yeah, that's chilling to think about those power dynamics. But Father Noel doesn't just leave us with these unsettling possibilities. He actually shares a stark example, a case study that really brings these vulnerabilities into focus.
Yeah, you're talking about the story of Sister Alexa, right?
Yeah. The young nun who reported a sexual assault by someone powerful within her community.
It's just gut-wrenching. Her story really shows how vulnerabilities can be exploited and how power can be misused. And instead of finding support, she gets this just shocking response from her superior.
Really shocking.
She's told to forgive and stay silent to protect the congregation's reputation. It's hard to even wrap your head around that.
Yeah, it's hard to process all the layers of betrayal and harm in that response.
Yeah.
I'm curious to get your thoughts on that from a psychological perspective.
So Sister Alexa's story really illustrates the dynamics that Father Noel's talking about, and I think it's helpful to break down the superior's response. So first, there's this complete lack of empathy for Sister Alexa's suffering. Like the focus shifts immediately away from her pain and onto, potential damage to the institution.
Yeah, the institution's reputation is prioritized over her well-being.
Right. And then there's this normalization of the abuse.
Right.
Like the message she's getting is this is something to be expected, endured, and swept under the rug so we can keep up appearances.
It completely invalidates her experience.
Completely. And finally, there's the just blatant prioritization of the institution's image over her well-being.
Yeah.
The superior's actions reveal this chilling calculus, like protecting the institution is the most important thing, even at the expense of her safety and dignity.
It's a complete failure of leadership.
Absolutely. It's a stark reminder of why Father Noel's call for change is so urgent. So let's talk about that. What solutions does he propose? Because he doesn't just leave us dwelling in despair. He offers a way forward.
He does. He really does. He advocates for this kind of multifaceted approach. And first and foremost, he stresses the need for proper training for leaders within religious communities.
Yeah.
And this training, should go beyond just outlining rules. It should actually equip leaders with the skills to recognize and address abuse support victims and create a culture of safety and accountability.
And he also calls for really clear reporting mechanisms, right?
Yes, not just vague suggestions to go talk to someone, but well-defined processes for reporting abuse.
Right. Processes that are accessible, safe, and ensure confidentiality.
Yeah, because that can be tricky in these environments, right? Where obedience and deference to authority are so deeply ingrained.
It can be, but he believes it's possible, and it starts with leadership modeling that openness and responsiveness.
Okay, I like that.
Leaders need to be willing to listen to believe victims and take their reports seriously, even when it implicates someone powerful.
He also talks about the importance of, psychological screening and support for those who are entering consecrated life.
He does.
It's about making sure that they have the emotional and mental resilience to navigate these unique challenges that they'll encounter.
Right. And it's not about weeding people out.
Right.
It's about giving them the tools and support to thrive in this demanding environment. So, things like psychological assessments before entry, ongoing counseling and support during formation, and just education on mental health and well-being.
It's about acknowledging that entering religious life is a huge transition and requires a lot of preparation and support.
Yeah, it's not enough to just focus on spiritual formation. You have to attend to the whole person, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And he advocates for fostering open communication and accountability within the entire religious community.
Yes, creating those structures and processes that encourage dialogue, feedback, and transparency.
So it's about creating a system where people can speak up, their concerns are taken seriously, and there are clear consequences for anyone who abuses their power.
Exactly. It's about moving away from secrecy and silence and toward accountability and transparency.
And education plays a significant role in his recommendations as well.
Yes, it does.
It's not just about responding to abuse after it happens, but proactively equipping people with the knowledge and skills to prevent it.
Right, and he really highlights the need for education on healthy relationships, boundaries, and abuse prevention. And this education should be a part of formation programs offered to everyone in the community, from novices to those in leadership positions.
I'm sensing a theme here. It's not just about having rules written down somewhere. It's about a complete cultural transformation within religious institutions.
You got it, and that's a big task.
Yeah, that's huge. And it's not easy.
No, it's not, but Father Noel believes it's essential, and he talks about the need to provide real support for victims' counseling, spiritual guidance, legal aid, whatever they need to heal and move forward. And this is a big one, challenging the attitudes and culture that allow abuse to flourish in the first place.
Yeah, that really resonates with me, even beyond religious settings. It's about dismantling those harmful attitudes that silence victims, excuse abusers, or prioritize institutions over individuals.
He's calling for a complete shift in mindset, a reorientation of priorities, and a commitment to creating communities where everyone feels safe, respected, and valued. And that goes way beyond just religious life, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's a message that speaks to a universal need for safety and respect.
It's a call to action for anyone who cares about building a just and compassionate world.
Yeah, and Father Noel doesn't stop there. He goes even deeper, and that's what we're going to dive into next.
Let's do it. It's a sobering realization that even in places, dedicated to spiritual growth and service, these vulnerabilities can exist. But Father Noel's message is really about empowering people.
Yeah.
He doesn't want to just expose the problem. He wants to give individuals and communities the tools to create real, lasting change.
And that's where his focus on these protective measures comes in. He offers a bunch of concrete steps that religious communities can take to foster safer environments.
Yeah.
So what are some of his key recommendations?
One thing he really stresses is establishing clear reporting mechanisms.
Okay.
It's not enough to just tell people, hey, if you see something, say something. You need to have those really well-defined procedures in place, and they need to be accessible and safe. People need to feel confident that their reports will be kept confidential.
That makes sense. Having that clear, transparent process can really empower people to come forward, knowing that their concerns will be taken seriously.
Exactly.
But just creating a system isn't enough, right? What about the culture surrounding those reports? How do we make sure people feel supported when they do speak up?
Father Noel's really adamant about the need for a big cultural shift.
Okay.
We need to start prioritizing the well-being and safety of individuals above the reputation of the institution.
So moving away from that culture of silence where things are swept under the rug to protect powerful figures.
Exactly. It's about being transparent and accountable, even when it's hard, even when it's painful.
That's a huge shift in priorities.
It is, but it's about creating a culture where people feel empowered to speak up and they know they'll be believed, they'll be supported, and that the right actions will be taken. So things like providing counseling and support services for victims, offering training for community members on how to respond to disclosures of abuse, and just fostering that environment where people can talk about these tough issues without fear of being judged or retaliated against.
It sounds like creating that culture of safety takes a multifaceted approach.
Yeah.
You need to look at those systemic structures, but also address individual attitudes. What are some other key things Father Noel suggests?
He's a big advocate for psychological screening and support for people entering consecrated life.
Okay.
And again, this isn't about weeding people out or excluding anyone.
Right.
It's about recognizing that entering religious life is a really unique experience, and people need those extra tools and that support to thrive.
It makes me think about that period of discernment and formation that people go through when they're first considering religious life. It's such an intense time of self-discovery, and it can be exhilarating, but it can also be really challenging.
It can be both.
So how can psychological support help people navigate that?
Well, it can provide that safe space, for people to explore their motivations and work through those doubts and uncertainties.
Okay.
And address any, underlying emotional or psychological issues that might make them more susceptible to harm.
That makes sense.
So, things like psychological assessments before entry, ongoing counseling and support during formation, and incorporating some education on mental health and well-being into those formation programs.
So like we're saying, it's not enough to just focus on spiritual formation. You have to look at the whole person.
Exactly. You have to attend to their emotional and psychological well-being as well as their spiritual growth. And this attention to well-being shouldn't stop after that initial stage of formation. Ongoing support and access to mental health resources are so crucial throughout a person's journey in consecrated life.
That's a good point. And Father Noel also talks about the role of education.
He does.
It's not just about responding to abuse after the fact, but being proactive, equipping people with the knowledge to prevent it.
Exactly. He emphasizes the need for really thorough education on healthy relationships, boundaries, and abuse prevention. And this should be part of those formation programs and offered to every member of the community, from novices to the leadership.
So what would this education actually look like?
Well, it would need to cover a lot of different topics, and it would have to be tailored to the specific community.
Okay.
But some things that might be included are understanding the different forms of abuse, because it's not always physical or sexual. There's emotional abuse, spiritual abuse, financial abuse.
Yeah, those can be more subtle and harder to recognize.
Exactly. And then teaching people how to recognize unhealthy relationships and power dynamics, giving them the tools to spot those red flags.
And also setting healthy boundaries,
Yeah, being able to assert your own needs and limits, but also respect the boundaries of others. And then communication skills, fostering that open, honest communication within individuals and within the community so people can safely voice their concerns. And of course, consent and bodily autonomy, really emphasizing the importance of respecting individual autonomy and making sure all interactions are consensual. And then finally, making sure everyone knows how to report abuse, what to expect during that reporting process, and what support services are available for victims.
Wow, that's a pretty comprehensive curriculum.
Mm.
It's not just about saying, don't do this. It's about giving people the tools to build healthy, respectful, and safe relationships.
Exactly. And this education can't just be a one-time thing,
Oh.
It should be an ongoing process woven into the fabric of the community. So things like regular workshops, guest speakers, discussions, even just informal conversations can help keep these topics in the forefront.
Yeah, it sounds like this proactive approach could really make a difference. It's about creating a culture where abuse isn't just condemned, but actively prevented. But I imagine it's not easy to dismantle those deeply ingrained attitudes and power structures. What are some of the challenges you see in implementing these types of measures?
One of the biggest challenges is resistance to change, especially in these very hierarchical institutions that have operated for so long under a culture of secrecy or deference to authority.
Right.
It's hard to shift those power dynamics and challenge those traditional ways of doing things.
And there might be a fear of opening Pandora's box. Some communities might worry that acknowledging the problem or implementing these stricter safeguards could damage their reputation or lead to a loss of trust.
And that's a valid concern, but Father Knoll argues that transparency and accountability, even though they can be painful, are essential for building trust and allowing for real healing.
So facing the issue head on is the only way to create a truly safe and healthy environment.
Exactly. It's about having that courage to acknowledge the problem and commit to that difficult work of creating lasting change. And it's important to remember that this isn't just an institutional issue,
Right.
it's a societal one. The same dynamics that allow abuse to happen in religious communities exist everywhere, in families, schools, workplaces.
So this message really extends beyond the walls of religious institutions.
Yeah, it's a call for all of us to examine our own attitudes and behaviors.
It's about personal accountability,
Mm,
recognizing that we all have a part to play in building safer, more just communities.
mm.
But what does that look like practically?
Yeah.
What can we do as individuals to contribute to this larger cultural shift?
Well, it starts with awareness, educating ourselves about the different forms of abuse, recognizing those signs of unhealthy relationships, and understanding how power and control work. And that can help us identify and address those potentially harmful situations. But then there's a question of action. What do we do when we see something that's not right?
Right, like what if it's just a subtle comment or a pattern of behavior? How do you know when to speak up?
That's a tough one, and there's no easy answer. But speaking up is crucial, whether it's directly addressing the behavior with the person reporting it to someone in a position of authority, or just offering support to someone who might be experiencing harm. Even those small actions can make a difference.
It can be so intimidating to speak up, especially when it means challenging authority figures or disrupting the status quo.
It can be, but Father Noel reminds us that our silence makes us complicit.
That's a powerful statement.
He's challenging all of us to find our voices, to speak truth to power, and advocate for those being harmed, and we don't have to do it alone. There are so many support systems, organizations, and people out there doing this work, and we can connect with them, learn from them, and find strength in that collective action.
This deep dive has been a really profound exploration of a difficult and often challenging issue. But I think amidst all the darkness, there's a glimmer of hope.
There is.
Father Noel's message is ultimately one of empowerment. He's urging us to step up and take responsibility for creating safer and more just communities. It's powerful how he frames it as a journey. It's not just about checking boxes and following rules.
Yeah.
It's this ongoing process of transformation.
Exactly, and it happens on both a personal and a communal level.
Yeah, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. So we've
Yeah.
talked about the vulnerabilities that young people face when they're entering religious life, and we've looked at those broader societal implications of abuse and how urgent the need is for change.
Yeah, we've definitely explored some shadows, but I think we've also shed some light on the paths toward healing and hope.
One of the things that really stands out to me is how much emphasis Father Noel puts on individual action. He really believes that even those small acts of courage and compassion can make a difference.
Right. It's like those ripples,
Yeah, exactly. And so he's asking us to think about how we contribute to that culture of safety and respect in our own circles, whether it's speaking up when we see something wrong or challenging those harmful attitudes, or just, offering support to someone who might be vulnerable.
It all adds up.
It does, and it goes back to what we were saying before about listening to those who are most affected.
Right.
Like safeguarding isn't about dictating solutions from above. It's about creating that space for people to share their experiences and be a part of finding those solutions.
Absolutely. Their voices need to be heard.
This deep dive has given me a lot to think about.
Yeah.
Makes me wonder how I can be a better advocate, how I can do things differently in my own life.
And those are the questions that Father Noel wants us to be asking.
Right.
He's not giving us all the answers.
Yeah.
He's challenging us to think critically and engage in that ongoing reflection and dialogue and to take action.
It's a call to change, a call to conversion, not just for institutions, but for each of us personally.
Yeah, that's the heart of it.
And he reminds us over and over that creating this safe and just world is something we have to do together.
It's a team effort for sure.
This deep dive has really been a powerful reminder that we all have a role to play in creating a world where everyone can thrive.
Absolutely.
I hope it sparks some reflection for you, our listeners, too.
Yeah, me too.
So what can you do starting today to build that culture of safety and respect in your own life and community?
That's a great question to sit with.
It is. And on that note, I think we'll wrap up this deep dive. Thanks for joining us.
It's been a pleasure.
It's been great having this conversation,
Good.
and we hope you'll continue to explore these issues and keep questioning and striving to make a difference.
Until next time, everyone.